We're excited to have with us here today Bindu Cudjoe. Bindu, thank you very much for joining me on the show. And we have an entire audience that is very excited to hear from you. A lot of them see
Thank
you
you.
live, a lot of at events, a lot of them on LinkedIn, and now they're like, okay, we get to learn more about Bindu. So the excitement has been building up.
Well, thank you, Gary. I'm super happy to be here with you on this and to get to chat with you. You're one of my more favorite people to talk to, so this is great.
See, win-win all around. Well, listen, let's
Absolutely.
start with a little bit about, like I said, people have heard a lot about you and seen you speak, etc. But some of them may want to know a bit more about Bindu. So tell us a bit more about Bindu Cudjoe, sort of your upbringing and sort of the nutshell version of how you got here today.
Okay, it started a number of years ago in a small town in British Columbia. So that's where I was born. My dad worked in coal mining, and so that's where we lived. At four, we moved to When I was four, we moved to Calgary, and that's where I grew up. So I did all of my schooling there, including my undergrad. I did a Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Calgary. I'm a proud alum. And Calgary was a great place to grow up and live, and you're close to the mountains, and it's a beautiful city and really nice people. But when I finished that, I thought, I should come check out the center of the universe. So I decided I would move to Toronto, or well, I hoped to move to Toronto. I applied to law school, and I did manage to get in. So I moved myself in 1996, I guess, to Toronto. And I've been paying higher taxes in Ontario ever since. So I went to the University of Toronto Law School. It's also where I've met some of my best friends, including my husband. And so we met in law school, and we decided to sort of start our careers in Toronto. I started at what was then Borden and Elliott, now Borden Ladner Gervais, and spent a number of years there, both articling and then in practice as a young associate. Had my first child, and then decided to make a move. So I moved over to what was then McMillan Binch Mendelsohn, which is now McMillan, and then spent another 7 years there, where I had two more kids, made partner, and then I kind of got to what felt like the top of the law firm chain and wondered if there was something else out there. So I decided to make a move and explore opportunities with a bank, because I had, through my entire career, I'd been a secured lending lawyer and in financial services and had always worked with banks. So I thought, well, maybe let's see what it's like on the inside. But I always have a plan B when I do things. And my plan B was that if I was not very good as an in-house lawyer, I would, photocopy the employee directory and go back to private practice. But fortunately for me in the photocopier, it seems to have stuck. So it's been about 10 years that I've been in house. I initially moved and joined Bank of Montreal. I'd heard about this new GC that they had and that he was really doing things differently. And so it was very exciting to kind of join. I joined a senior counsel, loved the opportunity to go deep with my clients, which I then soon started to call my colleagues, and to really learn about not only solving the legal problem, but also looking to see like were there systems problems or an opportunity to fix a process or to do things. And so that kind of holistic view of what I could help my colleagues do really inspired me, and I think was kind of the foundation for where I moved from role to role. So I had a number of different roles when I was at BMO, including to be the chief administrative officer, which was really quite a privilege. I got to work very closely with the general counsel, sort of as his right hand, and covered a variety of things that were outside of the law. So all kinds of new learnings, a little scary because, I don't really keep a budget at home, and suddenly I was responsible for the budget for the entire group. But figured it out. Thank goodness I had great colleagues to help me along the way. And so my accountabilities in that role, which were so different than what I had done for, sort of 15 years at that point, of being a lawyer and documenting lending transactions, I suddenly was responsible for communications and events and the finances and the real estate and a lot of human resource processes and the external counsel management program. And I think that's how you and I met, Gary, because I had heard about interesting things that you were doing with Alexa and that you were really into legal, sort of innovation and technology. And so we got connected somehow, and that's how we met. And it was through that external counsel management leadership role that I had, where we were working with law firms to, sort of arrange the relationship that we had with them as a client and law firms and put together an overall program. But we were also driving a lot of change around innovation and technology. Um, so that was exciting. And then later I had another role as a VP at BMO where I was leading the knowledge management function. So I was a chief knowledge officer, again, leaning more into technology and how we could innovate our practice, as well as I had the privilege to lead the legal team that does technology and operations. And again, an area of law that I knew nothing about, but fortunately I have great colleagues who do. And it was quite an amazing journey. I spent almost 7 years at BMO. And then I thought, okay, you know what? It's time for a new challenge. So I joined Canadian Western Bank. I joke that sometimes maybe I got the job because I actually knew where Edmonton was, which is where their head office was, because I grew up in Calgary. But it might have been a little bit more than that qualified me for the job. And I took that role, and it was an amazing opportunity to step into the general counsel role, to take on corporate secretarial work. And then later I took on leadership of the regulatory compliance team and our investigations team, our corporate investigations team. So 3 great years. Year one, I was doing a ton of travel between Toronto, which I remained an Ontario taxpayer, which my Alberta colleagues could not understand, and Alberta. And then I swore in 2020 that I was going to reduce how much travel I was doing, because it was really hard on my teenagers and my husband and my parents. But then I caused a global pandemic, I think. So suddenly I didn't have to travel anymore, which was an opportunity to lead differently. And I really did enjoy being home, and I enjoyed deepening my relationships with my team, because we were having these meetings, right? Like one-on-one meetings, getting to know them in a really different way than I had when, I was sort of flying in and we were seeing each other in the office for a few hours and then out. So then and this is probably way longer than you ever needed, but then an opportunity came up. So one of my clients from way back when I was actually at Borden Ladner Gervais, was a woman named Rania Llewellyn. So I had met her. We figured it out 20 years earlier, and
Wow.
we had worked together on a couple of files. And then I had, admired her through her career, and we kept in touch. And then as she stepped into her new leadership role as the CEO of Laurentian Bank, we were remaining in touch, but we started to talk a little bit more. And anyways, when she decided that she wanted to make some changes and perhaps bring in some new talent into leading her legal and compliance functions, I put my hand up, and the rest is history. So I joined Laurentian Bank in February of 2022. So I'm almost coming up to my year anniversary, and it has been quite a ride. It's been really a privilege, a real privilege to join this bank at this time in its history, to get to work with Rania, but just as importantly, to get to work with my colleagues at the executive committee table. It's fun to come in sort of at the start of an organization which is 176 years old. So like it's not a baby, but the sort of a restart of where we're at. And so it's been wonderful. Legal, regulatory compliance, the corporate secretarial function. So getting to work with the new board and doing that great work. And then just as of December, I took on a role leading the inclusion and equity work for the bank. So that's new for me officially, but this is a space, my lived experience, and then also a lot of work that I did through the external counsel management program and at BMO and CWB. Anyways, I've been talking about these issues for a long time, so now I get to do it and drive that strategy for the bank. So yeah, that's it. And I have no idea what's ahead, but I'm very excited about where I've been and bring all of that with me as I move forward.
Well, thank you, Bindu. And I've, despite how many years we've known each other, I've learned a lot, even throughout this last few minutes as you were sort of describing your path. I didn't know about the BC part, so you learn something new every day.
There you go. Yeah.
But also, a lot of this background ties into some of the questions I have for you. So, one of them is what interested you in law? Like, what made you sort of follow a career in law versus anything else?
Hmm. Well, for many of us who are the children of immigrants, our parents sacrificed a lot to come to this country to make for a better life. My father was actually moved to Canada in the early '60s and did a master's degree. Well, he came to do a PhD, but they didn't recognize his master's degree, so he had to do his master's degree at McGill. So there's a nice connection back to Laurentian. But and so he was a professional. So this is not the story of sort of a laborer's child move up, but it was very important for my parents that we both my brother and I continue on the path of like, what you're here, you have the opportunity for a great education, etc. So I had always really liked helping people, and I sort of had been raised with an expectation that I would pursue a professional career. I had the grades for it, and why not? And that was something my mom always wanted for me as a stay at home homemaker. So I thought law. I watched LA Law growing up. I'm going to age myself by that, and I thought that looked like a pretty interesting career, and it was an opportunity to help people, and so that's where I went. I decided to follow. I think my parents were a little worried. My dad always sort of said, if you do something in the maths or sciences, there's only one answer, and you can't get the answer wrong. But if you go to law, it's the subject of lots of debate. And then as I debated with him, I think he finally came to realize that perhaps I was well suited for the path that I was going down. But I really didn't know what law was about because I didn't know any lawyers. I'd never met any lawyers. They weren't in my, family circle, and I hadn't known any professionally. So I went in very blind. I started in law school, and it was an intellectual pursuit, but I had no idea about the profession and all the ins and outs and the connections that you need, and so it has been an education over these last 20 something years, but one I'm very, very glad to have taken. And the profession has changed a lot since I joined it, and where it's at right now. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Well, and Bindu, it's interesting because so many of us got ideas about law from shows, and whenever you see law in shows, it's all about litigation, saying "No, Your Honor," and and it's funny
Yes,
how different our real day to day is like. It reminds me of those memes that is like what I thought my life was going to be like, what it's actually like, and it's really
absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
even if you become a litigator, it's very little of it is like like what we see in the shows, which is those moments right in front of the judge, which is a tiny fraction of a litigator's life.
Absolutely. Yes. When you try to explain it to somebody else what you do all day, and when I was in private practice, I was like, well, I revise documents, I read documents, or revise documents, I take some calls. But now in my job, it's a little bit less lawyering. And, as I had children at home during the pandemic, they often remarked, they were like, all you do is talk on the phone all day long. And I'm like, but the people on the other end often listen to what I have to say, as opposed to you guys, where that listening, hearing is optional. So, but yeah, it is. It's nothing like I imagined it, and it's more than I could have imagined. So I guess that's a good thing. I love what I do.
So Bindu, you've had a very interesting career, and one that a lot of our readers and rather watchers and listeners will curiously listen to. Uh, who would be three people that influenced your life, your career? And I'm limiting it to three only because I know there have been many, and you could go up to three or less.
Absolutely. Well, I think I have to start at the beginning. So I would say, probably my parents, if I could group them together. My dad, for the adventure to leave India in the early '60s to come to this place that he'd never been. And he had come from very humble beginnings, and for him to kind of pursue education as he did, and then make a whole life for us was inspiring. And my mother similarly. So she was very young, left India to move to northern Quebec because my dad at the time was living sort of on the border of Labrador and Quebec, and for her to have that sense of adventure, I think that's been a huge influence for me. That take calculated risks, but take risks, follow adventure, and so that's been very inspiring. I would say a second person was probably pretty early in my legal career, and I was thinking about him actually recently. It's a lawyer named Simon Scott, and he was probably nearing retirement, or certainly later in his career when I worked with him at Borden and Elliott BLG. But he taught me a lot about lawyering, about sort of the balance or perhaps the imbalance of law and life that happens. And I learned a lot from him. He was always a gentleman, at least to me, and he took a lot of time to sort of teach me what he knew, and somebody who was very different from him, right? So he introduced me to clients, and he sort of showed me his work, and I learned a lot from him. And then probably the more recent one would be Simon, who I've referred to before, Simon Fish, the general counsel for BMO, and just everything that I learned from him about how to practice law, how to be a general counsel, how to professionalize this function, how to think big picture, how to say yes to things, right? So there was no opportunity, there was no kind of work that might be emerging or nascent in the bank that Simon wouldn't put his hand up to take on. And that's been really, I think, a trademark or a hallmark of my career, both at BMO, but then since, is to say, okay, like, we'll figure this out. We're smart people. We know how to think, and we know how to work hard and how to work smart. So we will do that. And so Simon has been, he was an inspiring leader when I worked with him, and he's been a tremendous mentor since I've moved on. And so, yeah, I think those are three I could pick out. I mean, should probably mention, people like my husband and all sorts of other folks. And my husband has been very influential and very inspiring to me through our time together. But those are the three I would put out there. So I actually snuck in four, Gary. You're welcome.
And
Or
I knew
five.
I had
I
to
don't know.
limit you, otherwise this list would have been far lengthier. That's why I said three or less.
I'm not good with
and,
following
uh,
directions.
and 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 it's actually just an attribute to a career, a stellar career, that and naturally there will be a lot of people in it. But you've certainly taken Simon Says to a whole new level with two influential Simons in your life.
That's true. Oh, yes.
Um, so, Bindu, I have a question that I know a lot of our audience would be really interested in. You are I'm sure there have been a lot of important lessons in your life, but what would be one that you would share with our audience to say, here's one important lesson that I really learned that one should learn throughout their life, and it would be important to you in your careers, in your work, in your personal life, whatever it may be. What would be one to pick? And I'm really limiting you to one now.
Okay. I will follow your instruction. I think the lesson is to be curious. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever point in your life is, I think it's a timeless lesson. It stead me well as I was thinking about what I might study, what a career might look like, what kind of law I might do, what kind of environment I might do that work in, and it continues to drive me. It's driven work that I've done in the community. It's driven just how I work through my day-to-day life with my family and otherwise. So I think curiosity is at the heart of it. And I think if you come at things from a perspective of curiosity, that usually means that it doesn't accompany with a lot of judgment, and you'd be surprised at how people will come along with you and let you in to sort of see and how much you will learn, and how much learning from lots of different perspectives will enhance what you can offer to your family, to your communities, to your organizations, to your employers. So curiosity.
And I will give you an opportunity to add a bit more with some tips later on. But I wanted to make sure we structure in such a way that our audience gets their trickling effect of lessons throughout the entire session.
Fair.
So we talked a bit about this important lesson and takeaway. Now, what were some of the challenges you've encountered throughout your career, and how did you manage them? How did you work around them? And
Yeah,
now I've given challenges versus challenge because I know it's been more than one. That's for sure.
it has. There have been challenges. So I will say my challenges have been probably they're different than others, obviously, and maybe they haven't been quite so arduous, but they have been challenges. I'd say professionally, one of the challenges has been just not really knowing how the profession of law worked and not knowing lawyers and not having a network. That was a hurdle to overcome, which felt both compounded by the fact that as I was trying to move into the Toronto legal market, I wasn't from here. But not only was I not from here, but as a woman of color, that also made me really sort of feel like an outsider. And so that was a challenge that I partly had to get over myself, but I also feel like the profession has come to being a lot more welcoming towards diversity in a true sense that might have made my start in law, had it been 10 years later, a little bit different than it was when I started as an articling student in 1999. So I think, getting to understand the industry, like the legal industry, and that those were challenges. I think another huge challenge for me was I wanted it all. I wanted to have a family. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a relationship. I wanted to have children, and I wanted to have a big career. And it felt like there weren't a lot of role models at the time who did those all three things at the same time. And so I felt like, there were times where I really had to kind of forge a path. And sometimes the advice that I got along the way was, abandon ship, take the off ramp, stop this, you can, park that and do something else. But I didn't want to. And I think, as I became a mother, it was pretty clear that as much as I love my children, I wouldn't be fulfilled and doing what I needed to do for me. And eventually really for my children if I was home with them all the time. But that's me. But then trying to sort of find a course and a path for me to have all of those things has been a bit of a journey over the years. I had three kids and sort of 4 years. So there was a period of time where that was a very intense moment in my life, but I was also still sort of that senior associate approaching partnership, but didn't want to take my foot off the gas there, and managed to make partner. So at my partnership ceremony, I brought my third child, who was about 6 weeks old at that point, to the ceremony. And that was pretty exciting. And then I think, the next challenge was sort of like repositioning myself from being a lawyer and only doing law to really moving into leadership positions. Now, I've chosen leadership of a legal function and have broadened it out over time with sort of different components, but been very related. I'd say this latest change to bring on the EDI stuff. I mean, it's a personal passion for me, and obviously, I've spoken a lot about it vis-a-vis the legal profession, but to do this work for across a diverse organization is really exciting and really a challenge. And I think for me, that's the challenge as I go forward is, in this role, how do I keep growing in it? How do I keep being curious, learning new things, taking on new accountabilities? Because I'm kind of restless that way. I've never really been very good at doing the same thing over and over and over again. As much as, I did do that at different points, but I'm always kind of curious about what's out there and what are other people doing and how are they doing it and how do they get to do it and why are they doing it and why can't I do it? And so, that I think those are probably some of the bigger challenges. So, and I guess the last one is to make sure I take care of myself along the way, because all of that excitement, curiosity, and passion for learning and doing, and I do tend to have a high level of energy, means I can burn myself out and the people around me. So really trying to find some balance isn't quite the right word, but finding ways to kind of re-energize in order to kind of come back up to the level that I want to be at. Those are personal challenges for sure.
No, and I can certainly see it, Bindu, and I can also see it all sort of comes together knowing you along with this background, because part of what I see you spending a lot of time on is that mentorship piece and speaking at a lot of events around this very issues, whether it's around diversity and inclusion, whether it is around how women can support other women lawyers as role models, some of the challenges that you truly had to go through and sort of discover in the early stages, and now making sure that other lawyers don't have the same challenges, or at least have somebody to model their career through. That's very inspiring. But it does bring me to another question for you.
Right.
You are involved in a lot of boards and a lot of associations, organizations. How do you balance it all? Like, what are some of the tips around balance? And now I'm giving a more open.
Yeah.
I'm not asking for a tip. I'm asking for tips because I know it wasn't
Multiple.
one a single.
Um, I think it's a question of prioritization. And I'm going to say quite candidly that, like, that prioritization has to be done by you. You have to decide where you want to put some of your time and more important energy, because I also don't think that you should get involved with other things just simply to be involved, like to put it on a resume or to write it down to add to your LinkedIn profile. I truly believe you have to put energy into it. And so, I'll be candid and say that varies over time. So when I had all those little people, my babies, and things were intense, I didn't spend as much time doing things beyond parenting and working. But as they grew, as my energy shifted, as my responsibilities changed at home or at work, it gave me time to kind of create some space. But for me, it's always been I do love working, and I do love the work that I do, and I love being productive in that way. I've always and it's always been important to me to have a rich, family life, friendships, connections that way. And it's always been really important to me to contribute to my community. And that's a lesson I learned very early on from my parents. They were involved in different ways in community things. But even since I was a student, I volunteered. Like, I volunteered in school, but I then did, sort of community volunteering. And so over the last number of years, a lot of my community engagement's been through board work, and often a lot of like lawyer boards, which often fed sort of priority number two, which was connection and meeting people and getting to know people. And then, in happenstance, or possibly it might have been a thought, it helps career, right? And it helps your development. So I think you have to sort of choose where you spend your time, and it shifts over time, right? So I'm having a big conversation with myself now about sort of the extracurricular activities, the community engagement that I've been doing recently, and where do I want to spend my time and energy? Because all of these things consume energy, so you have to get some from it, and you have to, and it's not a selfish thing. I think it's actually just very candid and pragmatic. You have to get something from it, and whether it's camaraderie or learning or whatever it is that you get, cookies, like, I don't know, like, whatever reason drives you to do this work, you have to get something from it. Otherwise you won't be able to give as much as you want. And so, yeah, so for me, I wouldn't, it's not a turning point, but it's just, my role as the chair of a community foundation in my community, which has been eye-opening and wonderful, is coming to an end late this year. And so now I'm thinking about, well, where will I put, if I'm going to redirect that time to something else, where is it going to go? And so thinking about that. So, yeah.
And Bindu, I completely agree. You have to be a bit selfish about it because you have to enjoy it ultimately. You have to do something. If you don't enjoy it, you won't add value the same way. But also, to the point about burnout earlier, if you weren't selective, then you'd burn yourself out, and then everything else struggles, and the rest of the areas you contribute to wouldn't get the best of you. Which that
Absolutely.
selfishness is for everyone's good in return. So it all
Absolutely.
works out all around. Um, any Now, remember how I said I'd get back to some tips and give you a lot more latitude.
Sure.
So now this takes a serious level of organization and balancing. Are there any productivity hacks or tips that you could share?
Mm. Um, I think I would say surround yourself with good people. Like, and that sounds a bit weird, or maybe I need to explain that. So there's a version of this as a productivity tip where it's about, if you are lucky enough to have a team to make sure that you've got people on your team who can help you do the things that you need to do. And that absolutely. And I'm very, very lucky to have a great team, both sort of from an administrative like support perspective, but also great colleagues who help, take care of the substantive work that we need to do. And they're fierce leaders who inspire me. But it's also about, in all the dimensions of my life. So my home life doesn't go without the great sort of constant partnership and support that I have with my husband. I increasingly try to get my children to participate in that productivity and that help piece, but that's a work in progress. But I've got a mother. Initially my parents both helped look after our kids when they were young, and now my father's passed, so it's my mom who does. But also friends, and I guess it's about sort of having good people in your life and being curious about how they do it and what they do, and being vulnerable enough to accept help, being courageous enough to say, no, not now, or I can't do this. I think those are sort of the pieces. One of the things I like just at a very work level, like really trying to listen to myself and think about like, when do I best work? When is the best time for me to talk with my team, to have one-on-ones, to dig into issues. When is it best for me to have some quiet time? So thinking time, so I can do that drafting or that writing. And I think the other piece that I would say that I've really learned over the last number of years is that sometimes you just need to sleep on it. Like, I think when I was really early in my career, one of the things I really prided myself on was my like response time, that like, you sent me an email, I was responding to it right away. But one thing I learned actually from Scott, the first Simon, was that sometimes it was better to just, sleep on it and come back to it the next day, or come back to it in a couple of days, because maybe you just needed to like let it marinate and think about it. And as I've advanced in my career, and as the nature of the matter of things that often cross my desk as the chief legal officer, the GC, sometimes thinking about it, pausing on it, letting it sort of soak a little bit is the way to go. And I think that sometimes that's one of the things that I've learned, even as we sort of deal with our inboxes and the never ending number of emails, is that sometimes if you just let it sit for a little while, it resolves itself. So the great lesson of vacation is, if I weigh in while I'm on vacation into something, usually I just create a whole bunch of work for myself. But it's amazing what happens and how it can empower your teams and the people that you've asked to support you if you just let it be. And if it's really important, it'll keep surfacing. And if it's really important, somebody will text you about it. But, letting that go. And I think the same thing happens even in the day-to-day when I'm not on vacation, that there's times where things just need to kind of sit. So I hope those are helpful lessons from an old
Very much
person.
so. Yeah. Now I know you're just fishing for compliments. We know you're not old. So but on that note, being that it's not too far, that you were your early stages of the career were not too far away, because you are not old.
Thanks, Gary.
Any what advice would you give yourself starting out um, in your career? Because a lot of the people do that are listening, and that even that are attending the sessions are lawyers in their new to their careers. So sometimes when you say, here's some advice I'd have given myself, and I know being curious will really resonate, but is there anything else you
Mhm.
would say to lawyers starting out?
I'd say yes. Just say yes. You know what? Like, there's very little that we can ever undo. And I think one of the terrible tendencies of lawyers is to say no to everything. Somebody asks if they want advice, and the advice starts with no. It starts with the litany of 1,000 risks. And that's actually what we've been trained to do as lawyers, right? I always use the word catastrophizing, but we're really good at imagining everything that can go wrong. And in fact, we're very much rewarded for imagining everything that could go wrong. But what if it worked? Like, what if it was successful? And so say yes. Somebody asks you if you want to get involved in something, say yes. And then figure it out after. Don't disappoint people, don't let people down, but say yes. When there's a new job, somebody asks you to take on a new job and you might not know everything or you don't even know what the job might be, say yes, you'll figure it out. And I think that's been, and be curious and go into it and accept that you might not get it right the whole way along, or it might not be perfect. Again, another challenge that I think a lot of lawyers have is that we have such a drive for perfection that we're afraid to be wrong, to need course correction. And so sort of letting go of some of those things I think are really are really healthy, and they're healthy for you, like from like a mental health perspective. They're healthy from a development perspective because you learn a lot from times when you don't get it perfectly right. I always sort of say, like in high school, I had, was doing fairly well. I had an English teacher and I had the same one for 3 years. And so at some point, my papers I was getting no feedback on them. I would just get an A at the top. And I think, she read them in the first couple. And then after that, she just assumed it was going to be fine. But when I got to grade 12, I had an English teacher, Mr. Lianzi, and he gave me a D on my first paper. And I was freaking out because I don't get Ds. Like, what is going on here? But I learned so much from that experience. I mean, I was scared to death that he was going to tank my university career, of course. But I learned so much from, because he cared. He gave me the feedback. He showed me ways to improve. He challenged my thinking. He caused me to think about things a little bit differently and bring in different perspectives. And I always sort of take that lesson away that, while it's great to get a thumbs up from people and good job, and to, feedback is incredibly valuable, and it can really, really add to your arsenal of skills. And I really try to take the time to give feedback to other people. I'm not certainly always, want it, but I think we can only get better by doing that. So, I think sometimes not being perfect in the first instance, having an opportunity to keep practicing and evolving and getting better, developing habits around that, and having the courage to do that is really important.
All right. So, Bindu, as you know, there are a lot of myths in the industry, and I joked earlier, and I said a lot of the lawyers decided to go into the career by just watching, and most recently, some of the new lawyers watching Suits, perhaps. But what is the most common myth of your job or industry, would you say?
I think from a perspective,
Other than knowing that it's not like in Suits and all, like your
yeah,
honor this and your honor that and strictly court
absolutely.
bound.
um, you know what? I think the most common myth of both for law and for banking is that it's really complicated. And that might sound weird, but I think at the end of it, right? And the thing that's attracted me to both law and banking is that we're there to help people through tough things, like the most complicated things that they might go through. So if I think about it, I was always a transactional lawyer, but you can think about it through litigation or a dispute. It's when the stuff gets hard, that's when the lawyers kind of get called in, right? To document the nuances of a transaction, to help through a dispute, to help negotiate a settlement. And the same thing is true with banking, right? It's often good things. It can be good things, but they're complicated things, right? How do you get a mortgage for your home? How do you invest your money so you have a retirement plan? So, I think there's a sense of like, oh, it's really, really complicated, but I think it always comes right down to the very simple, like, to be in these professions, you've got to really want to help people, right? And I think if you come at it from that perspective, it's not that difficult. Like, what are we trying to get to? We're trying to help our customers get to their objectives. We're trying to help our clients as lawyers get to reach their objectives and their goals, right? To settle this dispute, to close this deal, to get to actually doing business and not being stuck at contracting or whatever it is. So I think that's a common myth, that it's really, really complicated. We have to know a lot of different things, but it's pretty simple when it comes down to it.
And Bindu, along these lines, what is, if you were to say, one most crucial trait, and perhaps if you wanted to have more than one,
You'll
I
allow
will
it?
give the bandwidth for someone in your role. The just really thinking, because there may be lawyers out there in private practice or in house that are thinking of similar careers.
Yeah. Um, I think one of the things I'm most proud of and has probably really guided a lot of my success or been the base for my success is my ability to kind of deal with ambiguity, right? So the answer isn't clear. The path, there isn't a clear path in front of us. There isn't only one way to go. There's lots of different dimensions to this, right? So in the role that I'm in, there's legal risk and rep risk and people risk because people feel bad about the thing that's happened and they've got a lot of emotions about it. And how do we navigate our way through? There's risks to take. Which risks are we willing to take? Which ones are we not? There's kind of the ethical or the conduct perspective, right? Like, what's the right thing to do, even if there was a path forward that maybe more palatable in some ways. Is it what we ought to be doing? Is it true to who we say we are, our values? And so I think that's probably the piece that keeps my job really interesting, really exciting, really hard, but being able to kind of stay clear-eyed in ambiguous situations and not panic, I think is something that I've been pretty good at. I'm not saying I never panic, but I think that sort of comfort with ambiguity is a trait that has really stepped me well to date, and I think it is really, you want that calm person. You want somebody to be calm when the chaos is ensuing, right? And I think, when I can do that for my team or for my colleagues, or sometimes even my family, then that's that gives confidence, and it's how we get through the hard stuff, right? So we can get to the good stuff.
And I must say, Bindu, I know that we were both part of a session through Women General Counsel University around lawyer as an in-house counsel as an entrepreneur, and I think the same thing applies to private practice.
Yeah.
Ambiguity is just a critical part of it, and we can never eliminate it, and we just have to know how to manage it in order to do that work effectively, whether in-house or in private practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Bindu, I'll pivot to something else,
Okay.
and it's what we call our rapid fire questions. And here what we're doing is I will throw a question at you and I'll pause, accounting for any delays that may happen from our respective internets, and then just throw the first thing that comes to your mind and I'll move on to the next question. And there will
Okay.
be 6 in total. So
Good.
that gives you a sense of how we're going to play this out. And having done this for a couple podcasts, it's a fun exercise.
Cool. Let's do it. I'll be pithy.
So, what is your favorite word?
Favorite word? If it's
Yes.
word, okay. Catastrophize. Yeah, that's it. And I think lawyers do it really well.
What word do you hate?
Decisioning. One makes a decision, one decides, one does not. There's no thing as decisioning. That's probably corporate speak.
I love it. Um, what do you have a hard time pronouncing? What word, rather, do you have a hard time pronouncing?
Oh, I'm sure other people could answer this one better. I'm going to say I sometimes I
You don't need to have one.
no, I mean other people could tell you what I mispronounce frequently. It's not coming to mind.
And Bindu, if you have one, what is your favorite word in another language?
Oh, principese. I just always think that's such a fun word to say. Not that I've ever been called one, but
How many languages do you speak?
sadly, only one fluently. I know a little bit of the language my parents speak called Telugu, and I'm working hard on my French.
And no need to be sad about it. This is an uncommon answer on the podcast. It's and part of it is in getting to know you. And
Yes.
the last question: if you were to describe yourself with one word, what would it
Mm.
be?
Optimistic.
And Bindu, in the years I've known you, I think that's a very accurate description. Bindu, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I know that there's the audience will be really looking forward to this coming out, and it'll come out in short order, and it'll be a lot of lessons packed into a short period of time. But I think it's for a lot of the listeners, it'll be lessons that they've been seeking in many ways, and really getting them in a concentrated fashion. What better way than to listen to Bindu Cudjoe?
Thank you, Gary. This was a lot of fun and a real honor to be invited to join you today. So thank you for your great questions, and look forward to seeing you again soon. And I hope this is valuable for folks.